Okay, I've started the recording, and as I said in the announcement this afternoon, I'm going to be going over giving you some feedback on assignment 2 in terms of what your answers should have looked like, so that you can get an idea while the questions are still fresh in your mind. You can get a good idea of what an ideal paper or answers would have looked like, and also how we're going to allocate the marks for that long theory question, question number 1 as well. We won't be too long this evening because it's quite brief to go through. I'm going to do the recording this evening, but I won't upload the recording straight away this week because we are still waiting for some students to upload the assignments, those that have got permission to submit late. So in order that those students can't see the answers prior to their uploading, the recording will be made available probably by the end of the week. I'll keep an eye. I'm not sure what dates they've been given as their final due date, but I'll keep an eye, and then I'll upload the recording as soon as everything is clear. Okay, so the first thing that I wanted to just pay attention to is, and if you guys can't see this on the screen, you'll be able to access it on your copies of the question paper, and that is the referencing rubric, because I know all of the lecturers and tutors, we've been having lots of meetings with the National Office about plagiarism, cheating, no referencing, and the big topic at the moment is students using OpenAI for their work. So just in order to show students, redirect them to make sure that they are following these referencing guidelines, so that you also know if marks are deducted for poor referencing or missing referencing, you can see here on the screen exactly how that would have been calculated. Okay, so in the referencing rubric, we've got required technically correct referencing style. So if it's technically correct, there are no marks deducted. If there are minor errors in technical correctness, then we deduct 5% from the total percentage awarded for the assignment as a whole. So not just for that particular question, but we mark the entire assignment, and let's say the student has got 50%, but they made technical errors with their referencing of some kind, we would then deduct 5%, and their mark for the assignment would then be 45%. If any major errors in technical correctness of referencing is committed, we deduct a full 10% from the assignment mark awarded. So obviously in the case where a student has used OpenAI and failed to reference, or they've used OpenAI and then referenced the textbook, which is something I'm coming across a lot, then we will deduct a full 10% for that. And that's what we're going with at the moment. So always this referencing rubric is printed at the start of all of your assignments, so you can go there and keep going back and reminding yourself with all your assignments exactly what you need to do to make sure that no marks are deducted for poor, in this case, this is referencing, okay, not plagiarism. Plagiarism is a different story. If there's plagiarism detected, then we refer the student's assignment to the plagiarism officer, and it's taken up for investigation. This is specifically referencing errors. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. And we, as I say, we do have to keep reiterating these issues. Okay, so now just to remind yourselves, question number 1, this was the big theory question for 50 marks. We had question 1.1, which was for 20 marks. And this question wanted the student to discuss the importance and role of current liabilities in the financial health of a company. You may include the elements of working capital, the management of current liabilities, and the impact of current liabilities on the health of the company in your answer. So always, as I give in the instructions and the lesson plan, etc., reiterate to the students, it is vitally important that you keep rereading the required and you make sure in your answer you are answering precisely what was asked, and not get sidetracked with stuff that maybe you found in your research and then you start talking about something else, or the student starts waffling on with something that's not relevant. Anything that's not relevant, we can't give marks for. You have to stick to, here they wanted us to discuss the role of current liabilities in the financial health of a company. They wanted you to discuss the elements of working capital and the management and impact of current liabilities on the health of the company. So that was what you had to stick to in that particular question. Then while I've got this on the screen, let's just quickly have a look at 1.2. So this one was for, so that was 20 marks. The second is 15 marks. And in this case, we wanted some examples of policies which illustrate this statement, and the statement is that the policies that a company adopts with respect to paying its suppliers can affect both its liquidity and profitability. Okay, so this is the statement. The policies that a company adopts can affect both its liquidity and profitability, and the policies regarding paying its suppliers. So specifically, you needed to discuss the policies that a company employs regarding the payment of their suppliers for goods that they purchase, specifically relating to liquidity and profitability. And then the last 15 marks was negative working capital that you had to be discussed. In relation to the current ratio, so you obviously then had to describe the current ratio, explain what it is and which its elements are, and then discuss how negative working capital is closely tied to the current ratio. In other words, how does it influence the current ratio? And also what scenarios would arise that would create a working capital position, negative working capital position. Okay. And then obviously the impact that this might have on the company. Right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. Basically for the rest of the paper. Where's my screen? Share my screen. And then I'm going to show you the rubric, the marking rubric that we will be using to mark that first question, so that you understand when you get your paper back, you will understand how we have derived your mark for that question. Okay, so here my screen is being shared, and welcome the other two that have just joined, Michelle and who else did I see? Evan. Hi there, guys. Nice to see you guys online. So we're just busy discussing question 1. Okay. So for those that have just joined, I was discussing the referencing rubric and making sure that you guys understand how that works, so that if marks are deducted for minor errors or major errors, that you understand how that was calculated and why that was done. So just revise that. And then I'm going straight down here to the memo section. So I just went over the questions for question 1. So question 1.1, which is the one where they want to discuss current liabilities, the importance and role of it, and elements of net working capital, etc. This one was for 20 marks. So the way that we will mark this is there are 10 marks allocated for the theoretical content, and there are 10 marks allocated for application and analysis. So we've got 3 bands, if you want to call it that, 0 to 4 marks if the theory was not well selected. For example, irrelevant theory has been included. So that means you can't just waffle on with all sorts of stuff and fill pages and then think that that will get you marks. If it's irrelevant, you will only get for your theoretical content between 0 and 4 marks. So in other words, a student has merely written down everything that they could think of and the theory is largely incorrect. That will only earn you somewhere between 0 and 4 marks out of 10 for your theory. Then we can award 5 to 7 marks if relevant theory was selected and that your theory has been correctly described, but maybe there are some minor errors or omissions. So you covered a lot of relevant stuff, but maybe not everything that was requested. Then you'll get between 5 to 7 out of 10 for the theoretical content. And then we can award 8 to 10 marks for your theory section if relevant theory was included and the theory has been correctly described with no errors. Okay, and obviously that it's complete in terms of what was requested. So we'll be using this rubric, mark-in rubric, for that. And then the other 10 marks of the question is for application and analysis. So application is because they've set a scenario for you in the question and then asked you to apply the theory to that particular discussion. Okay, in other words, discuss the importance and the role of current liabilities in the financial health of a company. That's what we want you to discuss, not just repeat theory. So here you'll get 0 to 4 marks if the theory, in other words, the theory that we've given marks for here, if that theory and the context are discussed separately. In other words, you discuss only theory in terms of maybe just repeating it from the textbook, and then separately you make an attempt to discuss the role of current liabilities, but you don't link the two together in a logical, meaningful, really well-written way. Okay. So no attempt to relate the theory to the context of the question, or either no or irrelevant facts are included. And then 5 to 7 marks out of 10 if there is an attempt to integrate the theory and the context, but that this was not particularly well done, it could be improved. And then 8 to 10 marks out of 10 if your theory and the context are discussed as an integrated whole. Okay, in other words, your question, you discussed the theory, but you linked it immediately to the role of importance and role of current liabilities as you were going along. You gave relevant examples, your paragraphs, and the theory was discussed consistently, and you consistently related it to the context of the question. Okay, so we will be not marking, looking for individual marks in this question out of 20. We'll use this rubric for marking. And then the areas of discussion that we'll be looking for in this question is, did the student discuss the role of current liabilities in the financial statements? Did they discuss the elements which form part of the current liabilities? Remember, they said elements that make up working capital. Did they discuss payment terms, current liabilities, and their impact on liquidity? Did they discuss various ratios that use current liabilities and their impact on stakeholders, so investors, etc.? Okay. So obviously this list of areas to include is not exhaustive, and if students have included relevant points, we will be able to obviously give you marks for that. But this is just a guideline to the marker of what it is that we're looking for. And obviously we want a complete answer, not just one aspect or one area discussed. It needs to encompass a discussion on the entire financial health of a company and how current liabilities influence that. Okay, then anybody got any questions so far on how that works? Why can't I find? There we go. So far, hi Evan, thank you. Yes, I am well. Michelle, okay, cool. So everybody so far so good. All right. Then you'll see we've got the similar pattern in 1.2. So 1.2, where they asked about the policies that a company adopts with respect to paying its suppliers. So here, this was out of 15 marks. So we've got 8 marks that we can allocate to theory and 7 marks that we can allocate to application and analysis. So remember, again, we're looking for theory, but we're looking for the student to discuss that theory as an integrated whole with the application and analysis. So here we've got 0 to 3 marks if the theory was not well selected or largely incorrect, 4 to 7 marks if it is correctly described but contains minor errors or omissions, and a maximum of 8 out of 8 marks if the theory is correct. And then out of the 7 marks, we can give 0 to 3 marks out of 7 if the theory and the context are discussed completely separately and there's no attempt to integrate the discussion, or if irrelevant facts are included. And then 4 to 5 out of 7 if there is an attempt to integrate, but it could be improved, and 6 out of 7 marks, sorry, 6 or 7 out of 7 if we are satisfied that the theory has been correctly integrated as a whole with the context of the question. For example, in a paragraph, the theory is discussed and consistently related to the context within that same paragraph. And then in this question, things that should have been included, because remember here we want to know about policies that a company adopts regards paying its suppliers and how that can affect a company's liquidity and profitability. So things that you could have included that would affect its liquidity is creditors is a free source of funding from suppliers. So while we're waiting to pay our suppliers, that is in effect we have gained a free source of funding. So that would have the effect of increasing the company's liquidity. But if we don't pay the suppliers on time, or we take an aggressive approach, which means that we pay them as late as possible, this could have the effect of damaging the company's reputation. We could lose the goodwill of our suppliers, as well as we could lose supply. The suppliers might refuse to deliver any more goods to us. And then impact on profitability. So these would maybe be items if we took a more conservative view, but remember there's always that balancing act. If we pay early and take early settlement discounts, if we are a good payer and pay on time or pay early, this will assist with price negotiations in the future, which obviously would have a positive effect on profitability. And then if we do pay on time or pay early, this means that we are depleting our liquidity, which means that in those instances we would need to find liquidity elsewhere and not use our creditors as a source of funding, which that would have a negative impact on profitability. So anything that included that, obviously not only those points, but that's an indication of the sorts of things that students should have or could have included in their discussion. And then the last one, question 1.3, which was where we discussed negative working capital. And they said, explain by using descriptions of various scenarios how negative capital position could arise, etc. So again, this is a 15-mark question. So we've got 8 marks for theory and 7 marks for application. So the description is identical, or should I say the rubric, the allocation of the marks is identical to the 1.2 in terms of the theoretical content and the application and analysis, where always you'll get the maximum marks if relevant theory is included, correctly described with no errors. And for the application side, that the theory and the context are discussed as an integrated whole. For example, in a paragraph, the theory is discussed and consistently related to the context of the question. So in this instance, for this question, they've given us a sample answer, but obviously this is just an example of something that the student could have discussed, and we will look at all questions that's, all answers and discussions that students have given us, marked using this rubric. So just in case anybody was wondering, negative working capital is closely tied to the current ratio. So remember, your current ratio is your current assets over the current liabilities. And if a current ratio is less than 1, then that means that the current liabilities exceed the current assets, and therefore the working capital is negative. So you would have had to, in some way in your answer, explain how negative working capital arises in terms of that current ratio. And then if working capital is temporarily negative, what does that indicate? It indicates that the company may have incurred a large cash outlay or substantial increase in its accounts payable as a result of a particular large purchase of products or services from its vendors. But if the working capital is negative for an extended period of time, then that is a cause for concern, because certain types of companies, remember in the NSS I did discuss certain types of companies we expect a negative working capital and others not, indicating that they are struggling to make ends meet because they are consistently having a higher current liabilities to their current assets. So they will battle to find cash to settle their current liabilities with, which means they would have to borrow somewhere else in order to finance their working capital. And then this last bit is a discussion about a company's working capital does constantly change, almost on a daily basis, because we're talking about current net working capital as your current liabilities and your current assets, which are literally changing on a daily basis. They'll change over time as a result of different operational situations and needs at that time. So working capital can serve as an indicator of how a company is operating. And if there is too much working capital, in other words, overcapitalization, that means more funds are being tied up in daily operations, in other words, in trade debtors and inventory, signaling that the company is being too conservative. But conversely, if there's too little working capital, then less money is being invested in daily operations. So this could indicate perhaps overtrading. Sometimes overtrading also indicates too much working capital, depending on what's happening, which is then a warning sign that the company is being too aggressive with their finances. Okay, so that's an example of what students could have written and what we are looking for. So I really wanted to go over that just so that you understand when you look at your assignment marks, you understand exactly how those marks were arrived at. Okay, is there anything there that anybody is not sure of, or they don't understand how we'll be doing that marking? Is that kind of self-explanatory? Everybody's okay with that? You guys will understand. Okay, and then don't forget, once you do get your assignments back, you can come back with this recording and go through it again with your marked assignment, and you can have a look to see how you did. Okay, so no more questions on question 1. So then let's go and have a look at question 2. So let me just quickly go back to the question itself so you can have a look and refresh your memory. So this one was for 20 marks, And this was an interest or a loan question, where we've got a company and they are taking out a bank loan from Wealth Bank to finance a new short-term operation. They're only taking the loan for 75 days. They are being charged 15% per annum interest, which we were told 15% is 9% more than the current prime rate. And then in addition to the interest, the bank is also going to charge us commission on any advances made, and the percentage of the commission is going to be 1/3 of what the current prime rate is. So you had to calculate what the effective annual interest rate is for this scenario, and then compare it to 25.5%, which is the effective annual rate that you would be offered by Growth Bank, which is a different bank, and then advise which bank that they should accept and explain why. So this was hopefully quite an easy one to do, because there were questions exactly like this in your textbook. So you had to do these calculations to calculate the EAR, effective annual rate, for Wealth Bank. So your workings should have taken this kind of format. You first had to calculate the interest amount. So our loan is for 425,000 at an annual interest rate of 15%. So 425 times 15%, that would give us the interest for an entire year. Then we only want 75 over 365 of that amount, because we're taking the loan for 75 days of the year. So that means the interest for those 75 days would be 13,099 Rand. Then we have to work out the Rand value of the commission expense. So this is then going to be 425 times 6%, which is the prime rate. And only 1/3 of that is then the percentage of the commission. So the commission is then 8,500 Rand. So our total cost for the loan is going to be the interest plus the commission, which is 21,599. So the next step is to then calculate the effective rate, which is the total Rand value of the costs as a percentage of the total Rand value that we are borrowing. So that is 5.08%. But that is merely the effective rate. We need to convert that to an annual rate with our formula EAR equals, do you remember it? EAR equals 1 plus R over M to the power of M minus 1. So this is what we've got here, 1 plus R over M. And in this case, we've already calculated our effective rate, 5.08 is already R over M, because here's our R, which is the interest rate, and we've already converted that into 75 days of loan. So 1 plus R over M to the power of M, and remember M for Mary, that represents the number of compounding periods in 1 year. So how many times would interest compound in 1 year? In this case, 365 days divided by 75, because interest would compound every 75 days. And then minus 1, and then we multiply that by 100 to convert it to a percentage. So the EAR is then 27.27%. Did somebody ask a question? Oh, fabulous, Evan, you got that right. Okay, so this, perfect. So you will get this question right if you followed all of those steps carefully. First, calculate the interest, then calculate the commission, add the two together, work out the effective rate, and then convert it to an effective annual rate. Awesome. Okay. So those were all of the workings that you had to do. So you had to calculate 27.27. Then you had to compare Wealth Bank's EAR of 27.27% to Growth Bank's EAR of 25.5%. And then you had to state which bank's offer should you accept and why. So remember, you are borrowing money in this scenario. So when you're borrowing money, you want the interest rate to be as low as possible. So that means you will choose the 25.5% offered by Growth Bank. So you had to state borrow from growth, and then you had to give a reason because the annual effective interest rate is lower than that for Wealth Bank, and that's 2 marks for that conclusion. 2 marks out of the 20. Okay, so hopefully you guys managed with that, that was an easy 20 marks. I think that was the easiest question in the paper. Not that the theory questions were difficult, but I do know that theory questions are harder to sort of gather all of your thoughts and write them so that you get all of the marks for that. Okay, so no one with any questions about question 2?
Heather?
Hi.
I just want to find out, for the exam, would this type of question be like tested, or will it be tested again? What's your opinion about it?
Yes, you might very well get assignment questions or assignment type questions in the exam as well, because don't forget, your exam, officially you are tested on all of the learning units in the exam, not just those last couple of learning units that you haven't been tested on yet. So for the exam, you need to prepare all of the learning units, and you could very well get questions repeated that you've already had in the assignments repeated in the exam. I don't know if you did you do FINM7321 in first semester? You did, I think, didn't you? Yes. So if you remember correctly, in first semester, I can't remember which one, but there was one of the assignment questions that we had the identical question in the exam. So that can definitely happen. So I would, yes, use your assignments as a revision. Yes, I think you're correct. Use your assignments as exam revision, because one of the questions could very well come up again. Okay, so then let's have a look at the last question, question 3. So this question, if you just carefully, the question looked complicated on first reading, but if you just broke it down carefully, looked at those example questions that I mentioned in the lesson plan, you would have realized what calculations you had to do to then answer the question. So just take note on this memo, these amounts I've crossed out in red because there are errors on the memo, and I've just typed in the corrections next to it. So that's why it looks a bit iffy. It's just quite often there are errors on the memo, which is one of the reasons we're not allowed to distribute memos to students, so that students don't then study with incorrect questions. So let's just take a quick squiz at the actual question itself, question 3. So this is the information that you were given. So we were told that the company in 2022 attempted to increase their credit sales as well as their credit purchases compared to the previous year. So in 2022, they achieved a 25% markup on cost. Okay, so they're telling us that the company marks up on cost and that the markup on cost is 25%. So that, remember, that means that your cost itself would be 100%, excuse the scribbles. We would have plus 25% profit added on to that, which means your selling price would be 125% of the cost. So this is what you had to use to do your calculation. So they gave us that percentage there. We're going to use this information here about the 80% and 40% when we calculate our ARD and our RD and our APD to calculate our CCC. Then they told us over here the gross profit achieved was 8.5 million. So they're basically telling us that this 25%, which is the profit, equals 8.5 million. So if we know that 8.5 million is 25%, we can then calculate what 1% is. 8.5 million divided by 25 will give us 1%. And then if we multiply that amount by 125, we'll get our total sales. And if we multiply that amount by 100, we will get our total cost of sales for the year. So this is the kind of thing that they do expect you to be able to work out for yourselves as third years. It's not difficult maths. It's really just knowing your formulas, if you even want to call them that, and being able to use your logic and your common sense to do these calculations, to calculate the missing amounts that you then need to do the rest of the question. Okay, so they told us that the company's current total annual investment, which means for the whole entire year, was the 16.25 million, and that there's 365 days in a year. Then they've given us inventory receivables and payables for the 2 years, and the required is if the total Rand investment required to support the cash conversion cycle was 2.2 million in 2021, advise whether in 2022 their decision to buy and sell more on credit would have a positive or negative effect on profits compared to 2021. So remember, I went back here, I said the total annual investment in working capital was 16.25. So we have to work out from that total annual investment how much of that 16.25 million was invested in order to support the cash conversion cycle for 2022. Okay, so again, you had to know read carefully the information so that you calculated it correctly. So let's go and have a look at what calculations we had to do to get this answer. Okay, so first of all, we had to calculate our so-called missing amounts. Where am I? Which are our total sales for the year and our total cost of sales for the year. So remember, here's our gross profit, 25%, and they gave us 8.5 million. So that was given to us. And we could then work out that if gross profit was 25% at 8.5 million, that cost of sales was 34 million and total sales was 42.5 million. We could work out cost of sales, and then gross profit plus cost of sales equals sales. So there's various maths that you could have used to do that, but that's ultimately what you had to calculate. So the 8.5 that we were given multiplied by 125 over 25 would give us the total sales. And the cost of sales, you could also have said 8.5 over 100 over 25 would have given you the cost of sales of the 34 million. Okay, so this is just an example of how that could have been calculated. Somebody got a question? Oh, you got that, Evan? Okay, fabulous. If you gave yourself, I always worry about students that don't give themselves enough time to do their assignment, and then they're in a rush. And then if you've got time to sit down and slow your brain down and think carefully, you will always be able to fathom these amounts out. Okay, so now that we know what the sales, the cost of sales, and our profit Rand values are, or in this case, we needed the sales and the cost of sales figures in order to be able to work out inventory days, receivable days, and payable days. So you wouldn't have been able to do these three calculations without first working out that cost of sales is 34 million and working out, oopsie, I've typed something incorrect, and working out that sales is 42.5. That's supposed to be 42.5. That's a typo that I've made. Okay, so you had to calculate those. You had to calculate those figures so that you could put them into these formulas, which you would easily have been able to get in order to calculate the inventory days, receivable days, and payable days. So you had to remember from your second year financial management, when we calculate inventory days, our formula says we take the average of the opening and closing days. So you would have added 2022 plus 2021 and divided by 2 to get the average Rand value of inventory. And then we take that as a percentage of the total cost of sales for the year, and then multiply that by 365 to convert that ratio into days. Average receivable days, we are adding 2022 and 2021. You add the 2 together, opening and closing, divide by 2 to get average receivable, outstanding receivables. And we take that as a percentage of the total credit sales, 42.5 million, multiplied by 75%. So in the question, they told us that of our total sales, 75% was credit sales. So 42.5 million is total sales, multiplied by 75% to get credit sales, and then multiply by 365 to convert the ratio to days. And then our average payables, again, we're taking 2022 and 2021 outstanding payables, added together, divided by 2. Take that as a percentage of our cost of sales for the year, multiplied by 80%, because 80% of our cost of sales is purchases, and then multiply that by, where am I? Multiply that by 60%, because 60% of purchases was on credit. Remember, for this part over here, they told us in the question that 40% of purchases were for cash. So you then had to work out if 40% was for cash, therefore 60% is on credit. So total annual cost of sales times 80% to get total purchases times 60% to get total credit purchases. And then again times 365 to convert to days. And then to get our total cash conversion cycle in days, we take inventory days plus receivable days minus accounts payable days, and we get, you should have got 8.1 days as your total cash conversion cycle. All good so far? Oh, what did you do? Okay, so just go and have a look at your calculation and see where you went wrong. It might have been with those percentages. So I know students often forget to make that, to calculate that percentage. Yeah, okay, I thought, yeah, that's the most common error in these questions, that students forget to work out the total number of credit sales or credit purchases. Did you use 40% for that one, where they said 40% was for cash? That was just a little bit of a trick. Remember, I always telling you guys, you really have to stay wide awake and read the questions carefully and read them over and over again to make sure that you're not missing something. Oh, you just left it out. Yeah, that's very easy to do. Okay, but well done on getting that far. And then there's just the last bit of the question, which, oopsie, where did I go? Okay, so remember what we did here. We had to calculate total sales and we had to calculate total cost of sales. Once we had those two values, we could then calculate our cash conversion cycle in total days by using our 3 formulas. Now that we know how many days are in our cash conversion cycle, we can work out the Rand value that is invested at any one time in order to support the cash conversion cycle for 2022. Because remember, the rand value that they gave us, the 16.425 million, was the total annual spend on working capital. So we take the total annual spend divided by 365. So we know that we invest 45,000 rand for each day in our cash conversion cycle, and then we multiply that by 8.1 days, which is the number of days in our cash conversion cycle. So that means the rand value required to support the 2022 cash conversion cycle is 364,500. Okay, compared to the figure that they gave us, 2.2 million was required to support the cash conversion cycle in 2021. So there is a decrease in the amount required to support the working capital of 1.835 million. Our cost of working capital is 8%, so 1835.5 multiplied by 8%. Remember, the 1835 is the decrease in the investment. So that means we are saving 146,840 rands worth of interest or overdraft charges because we are investing less in our working capital. So that means those savings would be the amount by which our profits would increase. Does that make sense? So this is just where you've got to get really careful. 16.425 was the total annual amount. So you had to divide that by 365 and multiply by 8.1 to get the amount invested in the working capital cycle. Compare that to the previous year's total. There was a decrease in the investment. How much did that save us? Multiply that by the 8% cost, and it tells us the rand amount of interest that we saved. And because it was a saving, our profits would have increased by that amount. So you had to come to the conclusion, therefore, the company should continue with the new policy of increasing credit sales and increasing credit purchases because they would increase their profits by the amount of 146,840. Yes, there would be method marks. Let me just go and have a look at what they've got on here. I see over here they don't have an M next to that, but I would definitely award a method mark if all of these calculations are correct, because you've got a method mark here for your number of days and you've got a method mark here for your financing requirement. 2.2 was given to you. So this increase or decrease should be a method mark, and this final answer should also be a method mark. Obviously that 8% was given to you, so that would not be a method mark. So those last two there should be method marks, in my opinion. Oh, I'm going to the wrong screen. Okay. Any questions on that, guys? Did those who are still with me, Michelle, are you still here? Did that make sense to you? I know, you know, when we go through these answers afterwards, they always seem so easy when we see the answers afterwards, but when we're sitting there reading through the questions, it's often not that easy. Okay, awesome. How do you think you did, Michelle? Do you think you did okay? Can you remember? Oh, fabulous. I know your assignments are always super well done. So, and Evan as well. I know the two of you always hand in really good assignments. Okay, so, oh, decimal places. Did you round? Remember, in financial management or management accounting, we never drop decimals unless we're actually instructed to drop decimals, because in terms of the usability of our answers, or what's the usability is not the right word, so that our answers are more meaningful, we always keep decimals. But I don't think you'll lose any marks. I'll just have to check, but I don't think you'll lose any marks. Oh no, that's absolutely perfect. That's you rounded off to, no, that's perfect, because the correct answer is 6.17, and if the memo is rounded up to 6.2, we'll accept 6.2, we'll accept 6.7, but you might have a problem if you only wrote 6. Then I might have to just give you half of the marks instead of the half a mark instead of the full mark. So we never round, we always keep our decimal, so that's perfect. And 6.17 is actually more correct than writing 6.2. So don't stop doing that. In the workplace, if you are actually working in a company, in management accounting, you never use less than 2 decimals. In fact, in a lot of the exercises that you do, particularly when it comes to costing, you use 3 or 4 decimal places, because we are really interested in that degree of information. Yeah. So yeah, don't worry, you are correct in using those decimals. Okay, guys, so that is that. I'm going to just quickly end the recording now.